In 1953, three sisters vanished from the Rowan Boarding House, a place where travelers came and went, but the girls never left. Police records exist. Witnesses remember the lights burning in the upstairs hall long after the daughters were gone. This isn't folklore. This happened, and what people uncovered inside those walls still terrifies the town today. September 12, 1953. The Rowan Boarding House stood at the edge of a small town, its tall frame casting shadows across the road as the sun dipped behind the trees. For years, the place had been a stopover for travelers, a modest three-story home with 10 guest rooms, a creaky dining hall, and a long porch where lanterns flickered in the night wind. It was not grand, but it had a reputation for being dependable. Guests often remarked that it was quiet, sometimes too quiet. That evening, several travelers signed their names into the leather-bound guest ledger. A salesman, a nurse traveling home after a long shift, a couple on the road to visit family. Each would later testify to what they saw and heard on that night, the final night anyone saw the Rowan daughters alive. The girls were described as polite but subdued. The eldest, Margaret, 17, moved with the stiffness of someone always watching. The middle child, Clara, 15, seemed restless, glancing often toward the darkened stairwell. The youngest, Annie, 13, clung close to her sisters, whispering to them whenever she thought no one noticed. Witnesses remembered their pale faces, their downcast eyes. 30 p.m. The guests gathered in the dining room. The wood-paneled walls held family photographs, serious portraits of Rowan's past, none of them smiling. The smell of boiled potatoes and roast beef filled the air. The daughters served the meal in silence. When a salesman at the end of the table attempted small talk, "Busy night, huh? Bet you girls see all kinds of travelers here." Margaret gave only a polite nod and walked away. Clara avoided eye contact entirely. Annie muttered something under her breath, but it was too quiet for anyone to catch. One guest later told police, "They acted like they weren't supposed to speak. Like they'd get in trouble if they did." Midway through dinner, the Rowan patriarch entered. He was a tall, angular man, his face deeply lined, his eyes sharp and watchful. He said nothing as he surveyed the table, then took a seat at the head. He barely touched his food, but his presence was enough to silence the low murmur of conversation. The atmosphere shifted. Guests felt uneasy under his gaze. One whispered to another, "You can tell who runs this house." The daughters moved faster once he arrived, their hands trembling as they set down plates. Not one of them spoke until the meal ended. 15 p.m. After dinner, the guests returned to their rooms. The boarding house creaked with every footstep, the walls thin enough for voices to carry. A couple staying in room 4 later swore they heard whispers outside their door. Faint, urgent. Then, slow footsteps moved down the hall and stopped directly in front of their room. The man opened the door cautiously, but the hallway was empty. The smell of kerosene lingered, though no lanterns were near. Around the same time, the traveling nurse, a woman named Evelyn, claimed she saw Clara, the middle daughter, standing at the far end of the hallway. Evelyn described her face as blank, her eyes glassy. Clara turned the corner without a word. When Evelyn hurried after her, the hallway was empty. She testified later, "I wasn't imagining it." Another guest saw her too. We both gasped. She was there. Then she wasn't. 11:30 p.m. Several guests heard noises that night. One swore he heard a child crying. Another reported the sound of doors slamming upstairs when all the rooms were already locked. Evelyn, the nurse, claimed she could not sleep. Lying awake, she heard faint singing, 3 voices harmonizing softly, almost like a lullaby. She rose from bed, stepped into the hall, and followed the sound toward the attic stairwell. But the closer she came, the quieter it grew, until silence. No one else admitted to hearing the song. But Evelyn insisted until her death years later that it had been real. September 13th, 1953. The next morning, the boarding house stirred with activity. Guests packed their belongings, prepared to check out. The Rowan mother, pale and gaunt, went upstairs to wake her daughters. When she opened their bedroom door, she froze. The beds were perfectly made, pillows fluffed, shoes neatly aligned against the wall. The curtains were drawn tight. The windows locked from the inside, but the daughters were gone. No sound of footsteps on the stairwell. No signs of departure. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. The family called the local authorities. Officers arrived, took statements from guests and neighbors. Early reports marked the case as 3 likely runaways, but doubts grew quickly. One officer remarked privately, "Runaways don't lock the windows behind them, and they don't leave their beds made tight enough to bounce a coin." Word spread fast. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering. Some muttered that the Rowan family had always been different. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A local shopkeeper later told investigators, "Girls don't just vanish from locked rooms. Something happened in that house. Something none of us were supposed to see." September 13th, 1953. That night, as police continued their questioning, one neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Callahan, stood outside smoking a cigarette. She glanced up at the second-floor windows of the Rowan Boarding House, and she swore she saw movement. The curtains in the girls' room shifted. A faint light flickered within. 3 shadows crossed the glass, figures shaped like young women. Mrs. Callahan dropped her cigarette, backing away. She told police, "The girls were gone all day, but that night I saw them moving around in their room, as if they had never left at all. The daughters were missing." The police had no answers. Guests were terrified, and yet witnesses claimed the upstairs windows told a different story. If the Rowan sisters truly vanished that night, then who was still walking through their room after dark? By late September 1953, just weeks after the Rowan daughters were last seen, the boarding house had already gained a reputation. Guests whispered about sleepless nights, about the echo of girls' laughter in empty rooms, and about shadows that didn't belong to them. The police kept returning, not for evidence, but because witnesses kept insisting the sisters were still there. September 27th, 1953. The first real trouble came when a traveling salesman named Arthur Crane checked into the Rowan boarding house. His account is preserved in a police statement. Given 5 days later, Arthur, exhausted from a long drive on poorly lit roads, arrived just after 9:30 p.m. He signed his name into the guest ledger, an old brown book, its pages thin and curling at the edges. Mrs. Rowan, her hair pulled back tightly in a bun, slid the key across the desk with practiced politeness. "You'll be in room 4. Supper's already cold, but I can bring you bread and tea if you like." Arthur declined, too tired to eat, but he remembered clearly the way the staircase creaked as he carried his suitcase up. He remembered glancing down the hallway, where the gas lights flickered unevenly. And he swore, in his statement, that he saw a girl in a pale dress dart into the last room on the left. "I called out, 'Evening,'" Arthur wrote. But she didn't look back, just slipped inside the room. When I walked past later, the door was locked. I assumed it was one of the Rowan daughters, except, of course, they were already missing. Arthur claimed he woke around 2:17 a.m. to the distinct sound of footsteps pacing the hallway outside his door. At first he thought it was another guest, but the steps were too light, too deliberate, like a child circling over and over again. He pressed his ear to the wood. The sound stopped instantly, then came the whisper. Just one word. Drawn out, female, Arthur. He opened the door. Nothing was there, just the empty hallway lit by a single dim bulb. When he checked out in the morning, Arthur mentioned the incident lightly, half joking. But when the innkeeper's face went pale and she refused to answer his questions about her daughters, he realized the situation wasn't a harmless trick. By October, the Rowan daughters' disappearance was no longer front-page news. The investigation had gone cold. But then the police received another call from a different guest. This one came from a school teacher named Marjorie Kent, who had stayed the night of October 1st. Her words are preserved in the town's archive. "I heard singing. It was faint, like a lullaby, coming through the walls. It sounded like more than one voice, like 2 or 3 girls singing together. But when I knocked on the adjoining room, no one answered. When I asked Mrs. Rowan about it, she told me I must have been dreaming. But I was wide awake." Marjorie reported that she left early the next morning, refusing to spend a second night in the boarding house. October 4th, 1953. The mounting complaints forced officers to make another visit. They questioned Mrs. Rowan again, pressing her on the strange reports. Officer: "Ma'am, guests are claiming to hear your daughters at night. If they're here, we need to know." Mrs. Rowan: "My daughters are gone." "If they were here, do you think I wouldn't have told you? Do you think I enjoy this circus?" Officer: "So you're saying you hear nothing?" Mrs. Rowan: "Nothing but the creaks of an old house." People hear what they want to hear. But off the record, one officer later admitted he felt something strange in that house. He described the air upstairs as colder than the lower floor and the unsettling sensation of being watched while writing his notes. October 10th, 1953. The most chilling account came from Arthur Crane, the salesman who returned unexpectedly. He told a friend he wanted to prove to himself he hadn't imagined it. He stayed one night, just one, and never again. According to his letter, discovered years later among his belongings, he woke at 3:08 a.m. to find his door slightly open. He was certain he had locked it. On the other side, he saw a pale face, just for an instant. A girl's face, framed by long dark hair. He lunged forward, pulling the door open. The hallway was empty, but when he turned back toward the bed, his suitcase had been dragged halfway across the room. Arthur checked out at dawn, white as a sheet, and never spoke of it publicly again. October 15th, 1953. By mid-October, rumors about the Rowan Boarding House were spreading. Some locals claimed the daughters were being hidden inside, punished for some secret disgrace. Others whispered that their mother had made a pact, trading her children for financial stability after her husband's sudden death. Boarding house bookings dropped. But those who did stay told eerily similar stories. Doors opening on their own, whispers in the hallway. Objects moved during the night. One account even described wet footprints leading from the staircase to the girls' old bedroom, though the carpets were otherwise dry. October 23rd, 1953. The final straw came when a young couple, traveling from New York, left the house in the middle of the night. They later told police, "We heard children crying. Not just one, but 3 voices. We followed the sound to the locked room at the end of the hall. The moment we touched the doorknob, it stopped. Dead silence. But we both swear we felt something on the other side, pressing back against the door. After that, no boarder stayed longer than a single night." By the end of October 1953, the Rowan Boarding House was no longer seen as safe lodging. Guests left, police had no answers, and the missing daughters remained unsolved. But as investigators would soon discover, the upstairs hallway hid more than footsteps and whispers. There was a reason the final door on the left was always locked. And what lay behind it would turn the town's quiet rumors into outright fear. Because sometimes it's not what you hear, it's what you finally see that never lets you sleep. Again, by November 1953, whispers about the Rowan Boarding House had shifted into full-blown fear. Too many witnesses told the same story. Voices in the night, footsteps in the empty hall, shadows shaped like young girls. But it wasn't until someone finally forced open the door at the end of the hall that the town realized the mystery was far darker than missing children. November 3rd, 1953. First person to seriously challenge the locked room was Helen Morris, a librarian from Boston traveling south for work. She checked in late, noting that the house already felt unusually cold. Her journal, later recovered, included this entry for 11:47 p.m. There is a door at the end of the hallway. The knob is rusted, the wood swollen. I heard tapping from behind it, faint but steady, as if fingernails against plaster. When I asked Mrs. Rowan about it, she told me it was for storage. But what kind of storage knocks back? Helen didn't stay the night. She left her payment on the bedside table and took a taxi out of town before sunrise. November 6th, 1953. Police, pressured by rumors, returned to the boarding house. They asked again about the end room. Mrs. Rowan was adamant. "Officer, ma'am, we'll need to look inside that room." Mrs. Rowan, "That's my private quarters. There's nothing for you there, officer. And yet guests keep hearing things from it. We can't ignore that." Mrs. Rowan, "What they hear is grief. It lingers in a house like this. Do you understand?" No warrant was issued. The room remained locked, but one officer, in his notes, admitted that as they stood before it, he smelled something strange like damp earth or rotting flowers. November 10th, 1953. A man passing through town, giving only the name Calder, stayed a single night at the boarding house. In the bar down the road, he spoke in hushed tones. "There are 3 girls still in that house," he told patrons. I heard them call out. Not in English, though. Not in anything I know. But they were calling. The bartender later confirmed Calder left town the next morning, unsettled. No one ever saw him again. November 15th, 1953, finally, one guest took action. His name was Thomas Wright, a factory worker traveling home from Pennsylvania. He had heard the stories but dismissed them as superstition. That night, 2:41 a.m., Thomas heard scratching at his door. He opened it and saw nothing, except the hallway bulb swinging as though someone had just brushed past. Then came the giggle. A child's giggle from the locked room. Thomas marched down the hall and slammed his shoulder into the door. The wood groaned but didn't break. He tried again. On the third strike, the lock gave. Police records confirmed Thomas's statement. Inside, he found no furniture, just a bare cold room. Dust thick as wool on the floor. Cobwebs stretched from corner to corner. But in the center of the floor was something impossible to dismiss. 3 small wooden chairs, arranged in a circle. Each chair bore deep scratches along the legs, as though someone had clawed at them. And on the far wall, visible only when Thomas lit a match, were faint handprints. Dozens of them, all child-sized. Pressed into the plaster, Thomas staggered back, dropping the match. By the time police arrived, Mrs. Rowan had locked the room again, insisting the guest had broken into storage. November 18th, 1953. Word spread fast. Soon, townspeople demanded answers. Some insisted they'd seen the Rowan daughters in town after their supposed disappearance. Others whispered that the girls had never left the boarding house at all. A neighbor told police, "On nights when the wind carries right, you can hear them. 3 girls singing, same as they used to, only no one lives up there now." November 22nd, 1953. One of the strangest pieces of evidence surfaced tonight. A guest, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, found a slip of paper beneath her door. It was yellowed, the handwriting childlike. "We're not gone." "Don't let her lock the door again," Evelyn screamed, waking the house. But when Mrs. Rowan was confronted, she claimed the guest had written it herself for attention. Police kept the note. The handwriting never matched Evelyn's. November 29th, 1953. The why. Turning point came when Thomas Wright, the same man who had broken the door, vanished. Checked into the boarding house again on November 28th. By morning, his bed was neatly made, his suitcase stacked by the door, but he was gone. The ledger still held his name. His car still sat outside, but Thomas Wright was never seen again. By the end of November, the Rowan Boarding House was no longer whispered about. It was feared. Travelers avoided it, police were overwhelmed, and locals crossed the street rather than pass by its windows. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come, because in December, investigators finally gained legal grounds to search the house, and when they forced their way into the locked room again, this time with the law behind them, they found something that rewrote everything the town thought it knew about the Rowan daughters. By December 1953, the Rowan Boarding House was more than a rumor. With one guest missing, police finally obtained a warrant to search the property. What they found inside the upstairs room, sealed, hidden, and protected by Mrs. Rowan for months, turned whispers into dread. Because what was left behind didn't just suggest the girls had been there, it suggested they had never left. December 3rd, 1953. Records show that 4 officers entered the boarding house at 9:15 a.m. They described the air inside as unnaturally still. Despite windows being cracked open, Mrs. Rowan objected loudly, claiming her rights were being violated. "Mrs. Rowan, you've all lost your minds. My girls are gone. If you want to chase their ghosts, do it elsewhere." But the warrant allowed them access. The locked room at the end of the hall was forced open, this time with tools. Inside the room, police notes. The official report lists the following discoveries. 3 wooden chairs in a circle, exactly as before. Handprints on the walls, more visible now, as though someone had pressed into the plaster with force. A rotted doll, head cracked, seated on one of the chairs. In the far corner, behind loose floorboards, a discovery that silenced the room. Fragments of fabric. The fabric matched the dresses the Rowan daughters were last seen wearing. Officer testimony. One officer, interviewed in 1967, recalled the moment. The fabric was buried deep, as if someone had stuffed it there to hide it. "I swear on my life I heard movement in the walls. A scuttling like small hands dragging across the wood. One of us called it rats, but I knew the difference. I knew it wasn't rats. December 5th, 1953. Disturbances. Increase after the search, activity in the house grew worse. Remaining guests reported the sound of girls arguing in whispers late at night. Cold drafts rushing from under locked doors. A girl's reflection seen in mirrors where no one was standing. One man, John Fields, swore he woke to find 3 figures at the end of his bed, pale, motionless, watching. By the time he lit a candle, they were gone. December 9th, 1953. Investigators pressed Mrs. Rowan again. Officer. The fabric was theirs, wasn't it? Your daughter's, Mrs. Rowan. I don't know what you're talking about. Officer. People hear them, ma'am. They see them. Why don't you tell us the truth? Mrs. Rowan, voice shaking. If I told you the truth, you wouldn't believe me. You'd call me mad, same as the rest. She refused to elaborate. December 12th, 1953. Another disappearance. Nearly occurred. A young woman named Clara Hughes stayed the night. She reported scratching at her door, then silence. When she awoke, she found her suitcase dragged into the hallway. Pinned to it was a scrap of wallpaper, peeled from the girls' room. On the back, written in faded pencil, "We're still here." December 16th, 1953. Neighbors came forward, admitting they'd heard singing late at night from the boarding house. One woman swore she saw 3 silhouettes in the upstairs window, long after the daughters were declared missing. The timing matched exactly when officers had been standing in the hallway below, December 21st, 1953. At this point, the town demanded the boarding house be shut down. Investigators returned once more. The locked room was searched again, this time with greater force. And this time, they made a new discovery. Behind the plaster wall, someone had carved shallow shapes. At first they looked like scratches. But on closer inspection they were letters, names, 3 names, each one matching the Rowan daughters, and beneath them, a single phrase scratched deeper than the rest. Do not let her in. The police sealed the room, but the town was already in panic. Rumors of hidden burials, of restless spirits, of secrets carried by Mrs. Rowan herself, spread unchecked. But what no one realized was that the real confrontation was yet to come. Because by Christmas Eve, the boarding house would no longer contain its secrets, and when the daughters finally revealed themselves, it wasn't through whispers, or footprints, or scratched notes. It was face to face, and it was the last time anyone willingly stepped inside the Rowan boarding house at night. By Christmas Eve, 1953, the Rowan boarding house stood half empty. Its windows dark except for the faint glow of the upstairs hallway. Neighbors avoided walking past it. Guests no longer checked in. And yet, on that night, what so many had whispered about finally broke into plain sight. Because the Rowan daughters did return, but not in the way anyone hoped. December 24th, 1953. That evening, a traveling couple, George and Anna Whitmore, arrived from Philadelphia. Snow flurries dusted the main street, but the boarding house door stood unlocked. A single lantern burning inside. They later told police the house felt too quiet, like entering a church after hours. Mrs. Rowan gave them keys without speaking more than a few words. She looked pale, exhausted, her hands trembling. Anna Whitmore. Are you unwell? Mrs. Rowan, flatly. It isn't me you should worry about. At 12:17 a.m., George was woken by a rhythmic sound, knocking. It came not from the hallway, but from inside the walls of their room. When he pressed his ear against the plaster, the sound stopped. Moments later, Anna screamed. She swore she saw a hand, pale and thin, sliding from beneath the wardrobe. By the time George lit the lamp, nothing was there. December 25th, 1953. At dawn, the Whitmores fled, leaving their suitcases behind. Their statement to police would later be cited as the most credible account of direct contact. But what the Whitmores never knew was that they weren't the only witnesses that night. At nearly the same hour, Officers Daniels and Briggs had returned to the boarding house to monitor Mrs. Rowan. They were uneasy about the holiday night, concerned she might harm herself. What they recorded in their notes was chilling. Officer Daniels. At approximately 12:15 a.m., we both heard children singing from the second floor. It lasted no more than 20 seconds, 3 voices in harmony. The house was otherwise empty except for Mrs. Rowan. When we searched upstairs, the singing had ceased. Mrs. Rowan was downstairs, silent, seated in a chair, unresponsive. December 27, 1953. 2 nights later, the final guest ever to stay in the Rowan Boarding House arrived. His name was Michael Harrington, a law student from New Jersey. He checked in at 6:22 p.m. His diary, later recovered from his family, provides a minute-by-minute account. 10:03 p.m. Heard whispering in the hallway. Sounds like girls, too young to be guests. One said my name. Impossible. I didn't give it to anyone upstairs. 1:16 a.m. Door handle shaking. Open it. Nothing. But my shoes are missing. Found them placed neatly outside the locked room. 3:44 a.m. Saw them. 3 girls at the end of the hallway. White nightgowns. Hair loose. Faces pale. They were holding hands. I called out, but they turned their heads all at once, too quickly, like they were one body. And then, gone. Michael checked out at sunrise. He never spoke of it publicly again, but his diary became one of the strongest surviving pieces of evidence. December 30th, 1953. Finally, the inevitable happened. Investigators returned with townspeople as witnesses. This time, the sealed room was not just searched, it was torn apart. Behind the carved names in the plaster, they found a hollow cavity. Inside, more fabric scraps, strands of hair, and something worse. A child's shoe, half rotted, buried in the wall. The room went cold. Breath misted in the air. One officer swore the door slammed shut on its own, trapping them inside for nearly 10 minutes before it released. And in that moment, nearly everyone present reported hearing it. 3 voices, whispering from directly behind the walls. December 31st, 1953, confronted with the evidence. Mrs. Rowan finally broke down. Mrs. Rowan, I tried to protect them. You don't understand. Something came into this house after their father died. It wanted them. I heard it. I begged it to leave us alone, but it only wanted them. When pressed, she refused to explain further. She was taken into custody for questioning. That night, New Year's Eve, the house emptied. No guests, no officers. Only Mrs. Rowan's furniture was left behind. But just after midnight, neighbors reported the upstairs windows glowing. Some swore they saw 3 figures standing there, hand in hand, and then came the scream. A woman's scream echoing down the street, though the house was empty. By January 1954, the Rowan Boarding House was officially closed. The case of the missing daughters remained unsolved. Mrs. Rowan was declared unfit to stand trial, and the town tried to move on. But the house itself wasn't finished, because those who passed by swore the upstairs lights still flickered, even after the power was cut. And though the Rowan Boarding House was abandoned, what lingered inside wasn't. The daughters had returned, and someone, something, was still keeping them there. Every story of disappearance leaves a shadow. But the Rowan Boarding House did more than haunt, it consumed. Decades after the 3 sisters vanished, the survivors who dared to investigate carry scars that never closed. What happened inside those walls didn't end in 1953, it only began. By the 1970s, the Rowan Boarding House had officially fallen into ruin. The roof caved in, ivy spread over the brick, and the city declared it condemned. But silence didn't mean peace. Records show that every person connected to the last investigation in 1953 lived with inexplicable disturbances. Detective Harold Monroe, the lead investigator, retired early in 1961. His own daughter recalled him waking at night screaming, "Not the stairs, not again!" He refused to live in any house with a second floor. He died in 1974, never speaking publicly about the Rowan case. Margaret Fletcher, the only surviving witness from the boarding house, became reclusive. Neighbors in the late 80s recalled she never turned on lights after dusk, living in near darkness. In a rare interview, she whispered, "I still hear them." The girls, asking me why I didn't stop it. Local residents swore that for 40 years after the closure, strange lights appeared in the upper windows of the abandoned structure. People avoided passing by at night. Taxi drivers refused to stop on that block. If this were just a ghost story, maybe people could laugh it off. The narrator's tone sharpens. But why would police records, sworn statements, and decades of consistent witness reports all line up to tell the same thing? In the summer of 2001, a university research team specializing in American folklore chose the Rowan case as their focus. They had heard the legends, but they wanted to document fact. 3 graduate students, Emily Hart, Daniel Crow, and Lila Johnson, interviewed locals, studied police reports, and even filmed the remains of the boarding house before it was demolished. Their recordings captured faint female voices on the second floor. Though the house was structurally unsafe and uninhabitable, Daniel wrote in his notes, "The air feels charged, like static. We hear footsteps when no one is there." Lila refuses to go upstairs again. Emily, the lead researcher, tried to reconstruct the family tree of the Rowans. She discovered no burial records for the 3 daughters. Their names are simply stopped in 1953. 1 month later, Emily's journal abruptly ended mid-sentence. The last entry, dated August 4, 2001, reads, "They're not gone. They're waiting for us to say their names out loud again, waiting to be remembered." The team never published their work. Daniel quit academia entirely. Lila refused to speak about the project. Emily disappeared 2 years later on a road trip in Pennsylvania. Her car was found abandoned, lights still on, keys in the ignition. Locals in the city where the boarding house once stood treat the story with unease. They don't make jokes about it at Halloween. They don't include it in ghost tours. An older resident interviewed in 2016 explained why. "You don't joke about the Rowan girls. They weren't a campfire story. They lived here. We knew them, and whatever took them still takes." Another resident confessed something darker. "My grandmother told me never to look at that block after dark. Said the girls followed you home if you did, and if you heard them knocking on your walls at night, you had to ignore it, because if you answered, you were next." Whether superstition or truth, people still move away from the Rowan block. Businesses fail there. Tenants don't stay long. Archival footage exists of the Rowan Boarding House before demolition in 2002. In one widely circulated clip, a camera pans across the rotted stairwell. For a single frame, a pale figure resembling a young girl appears standing halfway up the stairs. Skeptics call it a lighting trick. Others freeze the frame and swear you can see 3 pairs of eyes staring directly at the lens. The university sealed most of the Rowan files. Freedom of information requests are consistently denied. No one can explain why the names of the daughters were struck. From later census records, the story's weight fell heaviest on families tied to the case. Detective Monroe's grandson revealed in 2010 that their family still hears footsteps in their homes, no matter where they move. "My grandfather always said the Rowans would never forgive us for leaving them there," he said. Margaret Fletcher's niece claimed that in her final days, Margaret repeated the same phrase endlessly, "Don't let them open the door." No one knew which door she meant. The 2001 research team, Emily gone, Daniel vanished from public life, Lila hospitalized twice for psychological episodes, became yet another tragic footnote in a story that should have ended decades earlier. On October 31st, 2019, a viral video briefly appeared online. Teenagers exploring the empty lot where the Rowan boarding house once stood filmed themselves daring each other to stay past midnight. In the shaky recording, one girl mocks, "Rowan sisters, are you still here?" Seconds later, the camera catches 3 faint silhouettes behind her, standing exactly where the boarding house's staircase once rose. The video was deleted within hours. No one knows who uploaded it. Local police refused to comment, but multiple residents confirmed patrol cars surrounded the lot that night. The Rowan boarding house is gone. The land is empty. But the story of the 3 daughters has not faded. If anything, it grows stronger. Because people cannot agree on what's worse. The idea that they were taken by something beyond our understanding. Or the possibility that no one cared enough to truly look for them. 70 years have passed, and still the lights of that second-floor hall are seen, burning where no building stands. Some say it's a memory. Others say it's a warning. The final words linger, cold and unresolved. And sometimes, people swear they hear 3 voices whispering from the dark. "Don't forget us," the end.